And I did a birthday party last night.
Oh, nice.
Here we go.
It is.
That's so funny.
Okay, so. I'm sorry, one sec. We are about to go live on We Act Radio. I will introduce us on air and on Facebook in just a moment. So hold on, we're getting all the tech set up. Okay, good morning and welcome to We Act Radio's Community Under COVID program. Rather than coming to you from the station, as you can probably see, we're coming to you from a variety of locations around town. And I am Virginia Avniel Spatz. I'm your host. And as I've told listeners in previous weeks, I'm more used to broadcasting in the station with an engineer who's waving at me, telling me I'm live or to shut up or whatever the case might be. We're doing the best we can. We're live on Facebook, live on We Act Radio. And I hope you'll be a little patient if things are not exactly smooth, but it doesn't really matter in some ways because we have two great guests this morning. For right now, we have a third guest coming on at 11:30. Later, we'll hear from Dr. Reed Tuckson, who is one of the founders of the Black Coalition Against COVID. And right now, I am equally delighted to let you know that our guests in the station, so to speak, are Marcus Batchelor, who is Marcus with a K, or the kid from Congress Heights, and Marcus Goodwin, who stresses his last name, which is Goodwin. Once you hear them speak, and if you're on Facebook, you'll be able to see them. You won't have any trouble distinguishing them, but the Marcus thing is a little confusing, so we're just kind of clarifying. We've got Marcus with a K, and we've got Marcus Goodwin. And let's just get right to it. I'm going to ask Marcus Batchelor first. Just introduce yourself briefly and tell us why you're running for council at large.
Sure, and good morning, Virginia, and thank you to you and We Act Radio for having us. I'm Marcus Batchelor. I currently serve as the Ward 8 representative and vice president of the DC State Board of Education, where I represent 16,000 young people here in Ward 8, but really work on behalf of all DC kids. About 6 or 7 months ago, entered the race to be DC's next at-large council member. I'm a native Washingtonian. Born and raised and still live here in Congress Heights, where before I was elected to the board, also got to serve my neighbors in an elected capacity as an advisory neighborhood commissioner for a term. And really decided to enter this race for the council because I believe that the decisions that were going to be made in 2020 and the decisions that are going to be made in 2021 in the next council are not just going to impact DC for the next 4 or 5 years, but are really going to impact our city for the next 4 or 5 decades. And I thought that at this time, it was most important that we have folks, not just with the right experience, but also with the right perspective to tackle our toughest issues. And so for the last 6 or 7 months, we've been going around the city, and for the last 6 or 7 weeks have been doing engagements like this to talk about our vision for a city, which is very simple. It's a moral economy that protects and expands folks' rights to living wage work. It's the security of truly affordable housing for folks across the income spectrum. It's a quality network of equitably supported public schools in every community. It's healthy, safe, accessible communities that are ripe with opportunity, but also free from gun violence. And it's a response to COVID that really makes our city a more equitable city than the one before this crisis. And that's our very simple vision. And a lot of candidates in the race are going to share that vision for the city. But we've also been talking about our unique ability to get things done, both as an elected leader, but also in my experience in government and nonprofits, seeing these issues from various angles, but also living them as a member of a community like the one I live in. It's important that we bring that perspective and that rich experience of bringing a broad coalition of neighbors together to get things done. And that's the type of campaign we're running. It's the type of council member I'll be. So I'm excited to engage today and really thank We Act and you for having us.
Okay, thanks very much. And now I'll ask Marcus Goodwin the same question, just a brief introduction, and why are you running for council at large?
Great. Good morning, and thank you, Virginia and We Act Radio for having us on today. My name is Marcus Goodwin. I'm a DC native who grew up between my mother's house in Columbia Heights in Ward 1 and my father's house in Congress Heights in Ward 8. And they both still live in those homes that I grew up in. I'm the fifth of 8 children. So I grew up learning how to balance conflict and build consensus among a big group. That's valuable experience, but I have much more experience that defines me and that makes me the most suitable candidate for council. For one, I've worked in the private sector and worked on a lot of government public-private partnerships in the housing space. The reason I got into this race is because I saw people from a community like mine in Columbia Heights. When the Metro came in 1999, the community became, from 2000 to today, the most gentrified community in America. Our African-American community lost more than 45% of the demographic population of the area. For people like my mother to hang on, who's a DCPS school teacher, we need bold leadership that's going to put people first, ensure that housing and economic development doesn't displace people, that incomes are adequate, and that city services serve them, as well as the information to know what their properties are worth are provided to them. Working in housing and economic development, I've been able to build up the knowledge and intellect to ensure that we build the number of affordable units that makes this a city that accommodates the working class, like my mother, like my father, and like so many other people who haven't been a part of DC's economic renaissance. And now with COVID-19 squeezing our budget, we need bold leadership that's going to ensure that we prioritize people when we put together a budget and we don't put companies ahead of folks. So I want to ensure that people who grew up like me and were able to get a tremendous education, both in DC public schools, in the private school system, and then with a college and graduate degree are able to happen. Because no matter what zip code you're born in, you deserve the opportunity to be great and pursue your dreams. And that's what I'm going to help DC build.
Okay, thank you. And I told both our candidates and those who might have seen our advance notice that we're going to focus at least part of our time on the mayor's budget and what you think it says, you know, whether you support what it says and what you'd like to see different in the future. So I'm going to ask each of you to tell me one thing that you think really disappoints you in the budget and one thing that you think they got right. And this time we'll start with Marcus Goodwin.
Great. The economic impact of COVID-19 has hurt a lot of our small businesses, certainly retail businesses, restaurants, the places that make DC great, give us our personality and identity. Businesses like Ben Chili Bowl, which is a multi-generational Washingtonian owned and operated business that's become a staple, not just locally, but nationally. I want to see more small businesses get the kind of support. So I talked yesterday about what kind of tax abatement for companies that have been materially hurt by COVID-19, because if we don't support them, they'll go out of business. And we've started to see that happen. It's better to have them operating, generating, creating opportunity, making this a more vibrant city, and paying sales tax to the city than not existing at all. The things
so
that
I just interrupt to make sure. So you're saying this is something that the budget did not do enough of. Is that correct?
The mayor's plan and the budget did not include tax abatement to retail businesses that have been materially and drastically affected, correct?
Okay, cool. Just wanted to clarify, because not, it's what,
Yeah.
1,600 pages or something, and not everybody's read all the parts of it. So, okay, so I'm sorry to interrupt. And then did you have a thing that you thought they did get right?
Yeah. One, it's incredible that it's a balanced budget reflecting 24 years of continued balanced budgets for the district. That means that we can retain our AAA bond credit rating. That means we can borrow money at the cheapest rate possible in this country. That means that we can, our debt obligations and interest payments are as low as possible. And it shows our balance sheet strength that we're not going to be subject to a control board due to this crisis, which has had a $1.5 billion negative impact between 2020 and 2021. So I thought that was impressive and that was done well.
Okay, terrific. And Marcus Batchelor, how about you? One thing that disappointed you and one thing that you applaud.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the applause. And I think, as a member of the state board, representing so many students and really banging on the door of government to get better funding for our public education system, I was excited to see that our per pupil funding is going to go up by 3% next year. I know we were anticipating 4% was the mayor's ambitious goal, but I'm excited that we're going to be able to invest more in the supports that our students need, especially coming out of this crisis. We've also got to make sure we invest those dollars in the right way and that they end up in the places where we need them most, but that's a positive step forward. The thing I was disappointed by is, even though we've got the 3% increase for our students and a lot of things stay steady, you're right, we were able to balance as we are required by law, but we're doing it on the backs of, quite frankly, the employees in the city who have given the most to make sure that we dig out in hard times and that we stay prosperous during good times. I think, saying that 37,000 district government employees, most of them, right, Black and brown folks from around this city and around the region, won't be able to get a raise for the next 4 years because we've got to tighten our belts, just doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense at the same time when we're not requiring our wealthiest residents to pay their fair share. And so I would have found a different way to fund our bold priorities. And if I were on the council, I'd be one of the folks protesting that in a city that's becoming increasingly inequitable, the folks who are working on the front lines for our residents every day shouldn't have to bear the brunt of our city's financial hardships at this time.
Okay, thank you both. And this is maybe a little bit of a zigzag off of the budget, but We Act Radio has been asking everybody who comes through to answer two questions. What do you think about cancel rent? And what do you think about universal basic income? Which are, they're budget questions. They might not be directly related to the mayor, but so I will just keep going back and forth. So Marcus Batchelor, you're first.
Yeah, well, in terms of universal basic income, I think it's a novel idea that I think is showing some promising results around the country. A friend of mine, Mayor Michael Tubbs in Stockton, has actually advanced a pilot program there that is really filling the gap for our most economically insecure residents. And I think it's something, especially at this time when so many folks are falling out of the job market, and quite frankly, we don't have a workforce system that's adequately connecting people to living wage work or retraining folks for new work. We've got to figure out how we fill the gap to make sure that folks have security. I think in addition to, the first one was UBI, the second one was
cancel rent.
Cancel rent, yeah. So clearly, I think that, a moratorium on evictions is prudent during this time, but it doesn't take away the fact that once this emergency is over, there are going to be folks with the rent due and maybe a significant portion of 2 or 3 months of the rent due. And so we've got to provide supports for renters who need that extra assistance. And I'd be totally willing to explore the possibility of canceling rent during this period to make that possible. We're in a housing crisis right now, and we can't throw more people out onto the street as we try to recover and create a more equitable city.
Okay, and Marcus Goodwin, what do you say?
So with regards to universal basic income, not to continue the similarities, but I'm also good friends with Michael Tubbs. I think that a city of similar size as Washington certainly is a good pilot and a good example for us to look at for the effectiveness of a program and studying its impacts. I certainly am happy to consider a universal basic income program because we've had 85,000 people in the District of Columbia file for unemployment claims in the past 8 weeks. It's at a historic figure, and it's similar to what's going on nationally. So we know that people need to bridge the gap in their income because they do have a cost of living that needs to be met. So certainly we should be a city that cares for all, protects all, and a universal basic income can help start to be that part of our city that provides the social safety net. When it comes to cancel rent, I think on the face of it, who wouldn't want to pay rent? It sounds like a good idea, but ultimately it has a lot of negative impacts that we need to be cognizant of. If renters wholly don't pay rent, landlords have many obligations that they have to meet that actually end up hurting renters. They have to pay their mortgage. The renter doesn't necessarily feel that. They have to pay their insurance. Renters could certainly feel that. They have to pay for building improvements. That directly hurts the renters if they don't have a margin to be able to do that. And they have to pay taxes to the city. And the largest component of our $8 billion locally sourced are property taxes, both residential and commercial. So what happens if the city starts to lose money? That means we have less money for schools, less money for healthcare support, human services, police, the fire department. So that's not a domino effect that I want to be part of causing. I do think there are other creative ways for us to solve it. Certainly, universal basic income we just described helps create that capital necessary, but also creating opportunities for people for their mortgage forbearance, not due in 3 or 6 months, but put that money on the back end of the mortgage at the end of the 30-year period. Or for renters, put it at the back end of their lease, whatever that time is. So I think we need to think responsibly when we think ambitiously.
Terrific. Thank you both. And a half an hour always seems like such a long time. And then we're I don't know, it seems like our time is just zooming away. There are many other things in the budget, and I had a few things that I wondered about. Do you think, I'll list a couple and let you respond to which you choose. Do you think $250,000 to support returning citizens opening businesses will be more than a drop in the bucket? I mean, how many businesses can you open for $250,000? What about the money for Bard College, which is more Bard College High School, which is more money for a non-DCPS school? And also, I know you both are concerned about the Office of Neighborhood Safety, and there were quite a few changes there. So I'll let you you each decide which you'd like to say, or if you'd like to, make another point. And I don't know whose turn it is. Marcus Goodwin, because you're right there.
Yeah, the $250,000 for returning citizens to start a business is wholly inadequate. If that's something that we value, we would reflect it in our budget, in our dollar allocation. So I hope that's one of the things that the council pushes back on and finds either a revenue source or is able to look at projects that have been deemed necessary investments that the dollars could be reallocated from. For any small business, certainly in a city expensive like the district, commercial retail rents are expensive. Buying and building a property are not even an option in that regard. And then procurement for supplies, materials, hiring people. Each entrepreneur probably needs at least $250,000 independently. So I think we need to look at the size and scale of the impact we're trying to have. If there are, 10 people applying to the program, we should probably find a way to accommodate more than half of them. If there are 40 people applying, we should find a way to accommodate more than half of them and put forth the best applicants. So that's something that I definitely think we need to dig deep and show that we really value and reflect in our budget.
Okay, thanks. And Marcus Batchelor, how about you?
Yeah, so clearly I think we need more support to give our returning citizens the opportunity to not just re-enter society, with the supports they need, but the tools to really thrive once they return home. And we need to put our money where our mouths are, especially in a period in our city's history where lifting up, right, our most vulnerable residents is going to be important to the entire city's success. When it comes to Bard Early College, as the Ward 8 representative on the state board, I'm ecstatic that Bard is coming to Ward 8. It is going to be it's going to be under the DCPS portfolio, but doing that critical work of bringing early college programs and application schools to sections of the city where they traditionally don't exist is the type of equity that we need to build citywide. And so I'm ecstatic about BART and that we're going to be reutilizing the Malcolm X Opportunity Center in a new way that hopefully will create a hub for the community beyond, I think, what should be very high quality instruction for our students. I also think, and I'll just go very quickly, I also think the budget missed the mark on a lot of things, right? We did not provide, adequate supports for our undocumented neighbors who are losing work, right? We didn't provide adequate enough support to support our homeless residents and to quickly move them into permanent supportive housing. And then on top of that, the large cut to our housing preservation fund just makes no sense when we've got to both maintain and produce as many affordable units as possible and invest more boldly in deeply affordable housing, that 30% AMI or lower, that's really going to lift up our most vulnerable residents and the folks who need a leg up the most. And then lastly, I'll say, as a child of a former early child care provider, we are not providing enough support for our child care workers, and we're not providing enough support to make sure that our child care facilities, are ready when parents have to return to work, when essential workers are working now. And the fact that we stand to lose, 20% or more of our childcare seats because of this crisis means we've got to invest more deeply to make sure that we're filling that gap for our parents. So there's a lot of things we've got to do in this budget and in budgets moving forward, and hopefully in 2021 I'm a part of that conversation. But it's gonna take bold investment and us finding new revenue streams to meet those bold goals, because right now is the time to create the equity we want to see. And I'm all for being responsible, but we have a overdue obligation to so many people across this city, and now's the time to make those investments.
Okay, I do want to explain to anyone listening that I kind of flubbed the question about the Bard College High School. What Marcus so clearly explained, and I didn't, is that it's an application high school. So it's not like H.D. Woodson or Anacostia or Ballou, where you can enter if that's your neighborhood school, but it is within the DCPS portfolio. So thank you for correcting me on that. And we are running out of time, but I feel like maybe Marcus Goodwin wants to add another thought, and then we'll close out. Did you have any additional thoughts on the budget?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we look at the school modernization that the budget creates the opportunity for, it shows that we have created more investment in a robust school choice program. That means that our students, no matter what community they're in, have a great educational option that's tailored and suited to their particular needs. I think it's great that we didn't have to raise taxes on so many businesses that are struggling right now, especially small minority-owned, longtime business owners who have really been hurt the most by this crisis, and want to ensure that when we bounce back, we don't bounce back to a further gentrified city. Beyond that, I think that it's great that the mayor was able to ensure that we weren't spending down our reserves. Our reserves are part of what makes us a AAA bond rated city. So for us to be able to only spend the portion of the reserves designated to help in a crisis like this, plus use $322 million in surplus from 2019, that's a positive for us. I do think for government agency spending, especially personnel and pay increase freezes for the next 4 years, that will be to the detriment of many municipal workers who are residents, are heads of household who really need to support families and support a good high quality of living in the city. And a pay freeze will be to their detriment. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm the son of a DCPS teacher currently. So I want to ensure that government workers and our working class in the city continue to get the kind of payment and remuneration that respects the hard work that they do and the high cost of living in DC. So I hope that's another point that the council can push back on and continue to push and make changes from.
Okay, we are really very close to the bottom of the hour, so I'm going to give you each like 1 minute to say your last thing. And I do want to tell you, don't waste your time telling everybody your websites. I put it all on communityundercovid.com so they can find both of them there. And Marcus Batchelor, why don't you close us out with what you want to say, and then we'll go back to Marcus Goodwin.
Sure. I hope that everybody will engage with us, and we hope to earn your vote on November 3rd for the simple fact that now is the time to elect leadership that's going to look out for the least of us in our city. The fact is, this COVID crisis has most acutely impacted not just the businesses in our city, but the people who make those businesses run, right? Not just the homeowners and the renters, but the folks who don't have a home to own or rent to pay, who are living on our streets. It most acutely impacts our most vulnerable students who weren't getting the quality instruction they needed in their classroom across the city, and are struggling even further to get that quality instruction while at home. And so we've got to do all we can, right, and invest all we can to make sure that we create a more equitable city, that all boats do actually rise with the tide. And when we talk about creating a more prosperous city and maintaining the prosperity we have, if we do that, right, if we give everybody in this city an opportunity to thrive, and we invest where the private sector won't go, or where the development community won't go, or where the federal government won't go, if we do those things, if we invest more deeply in those things, then we'll see a city that's truly prosperous for all of us. And that's the vision we're going to advance through this campaign through November 3rd, but hopefully a vision we get to advance over the next 4 years on the council.
All right, thank you so much. And Marcus Goodwin, I'll give you 90 seconds too.
Thank you. Again, I am the most prepared, the most qualified, the most ready candidate to step in and ensure that our city doesn't continue to gentrify. And it's personal for me. Growing up in Columbia Heights, I saw a predominantly African-American community torn apart by the economic development that came. So I want to ensure that we have strong, responsible growth in economic development that respects the rich culture of our city. We'll do that by focusing on financial responsibility, ensuring that any investments we make reflect our values, eradicating food and healthcare deserts, ensuring that east of the Anacostia River, we create the economic incentives to build more grocery stores and more healthcare centers to ensure that obstetrics and childcare is a robustly provided option for people who live in those parts of the city. I also want to address crime and improve safety. We do that by addressing the underlying causes of crime before they occur. That's underemployment, creating job training and adult education, and treating addiction and mental illness, as well as investing in violence interrupters and programs like Cure the Streets. When we talk about education, I'm a strong proponent of school choice, because schools should be a nurturing and enlightening experience for children. So we have to provide them every opportunity with their neighborhood school and beyond. And also ensuring that the at-large members are great constituent service providers, because one council member, it's really tough to address 80,000 people. So I'll be stepping up to ensure that we repair our roads, build more bike lane infrastructure, as well as transit infrastructure, and invest in fixing our public housing. So thank you for your time, and I look forward, Marcus Goodwin, to serving as your next at-large council member on November 3rd. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Marcus Goodwin. Thank you, Marcus Batchelor. It was an enlightening conversation. Really appreciate it. And good luck in November, and I'm sure we'll see you in between. So, after the break, we will be back with Dr. Reed Tuckson of the Black Coalition Against COVID. So we'll be taking a break now, and those who are on Facebook Live will just have to be patient for a minute. Thank you both. Bye.
Thank you, Virginia. I assume I'm supposed to log off, Virginia?
Please, yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Okay. Okay, we are back live on We Act Radio. This is the Community Under COVID show, and my next guest is Dr. Reed Tuckson. Dr. Tuckson is a medical doctor and healthcare executive. He's a multi-generational person in Washington, D.C., graduated from Howard and from Georgetown Medical, and was commissioner of public health in DC when I first arrived to town a couple decades back, when we were in the throes of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. He's a past president of the American Telemedicine Association, which is, so crucial these days. And he serves on many boards, Howard University. He's an advisory committee to the director of NIH, and most recently, the Black Coalition Against COVID, which is why I invited him here this morning and was so glad that he could join us. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Tuckson. So please tell us if there's anything that I missed that, in your bio, and anything that you'd like to tell us about how the Black Coalition Against COVID got started.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction. And I don't think you missed a thing that was of any more relevance than what you had to say. This Black Coalition Against COVID has been a very fascinating initiative to be a part of. We're all of maybe not even a month old. And it's really premised around the principles that I most learned most intimately during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and that is that the community itself is the locus of being able to control these kinds of disease outbreaks, that it's not going to happen from on high, it's going to happen within the life of the community. And as a result of that, we have to be very, very engaged with our community leaders and our community residents in designing and shaping what we do, how we communicate information, how we disseminate information, or all of that. And so what we've been doing is going around meeting with legitimate community leaders, people who have the voice of authenticity, the voice of integrity within our community, whether it's the faith community, our homeless, returning incarcerated, substance abuse, our youth, our musicians, labor. Just really going and touching base with all the subpopulations that make up this wonderful DC, and then engaging the leadership there to help be able to be the ones to transmit the message, to be able to help change the culture into one that's going to support the kinds of behaviors that we know need to be done.
So in some ways, what's happening now does certainly rely on your experience with HIV/AIDS, but the method of transmission is so different with a virus that you can, apparently catch from, touching up. I remember back in the day, people were afraid that if they touched the delivery box from the pizza man, that they could get AIDS. And it took a long time to explain that was not going to happen. But now our concerns are a little different. So can you speak to how the transmission and the public health message has to be different, or is it the same?
Some of it is the same in that some of the fundamental blocking and tackling of public health are the same. And we'll come to this in a minute for things like, for example, contact tracing, the need to be able to test people and then be able to engage that person with their intimate contacts, people they've been around and associated with that they may have infected, and then having those individuals take the appropriate action. That triad is core and essential both in HIV and it's also here. But your question really does indicate the need to explore some major differences. And of course it is that with this disease, people who are asymptomatic, people who show no signs whatsoever, can be very contagious going forward. And we don't even know we're sure now of how many days of asymptomatic nature that you are infectious before the symptoms actually start to appear. But it's certainly several days, and we do know that for sure. We know that this is a virus that can be transmitted not only by coughing and sneezing, but simply talking to another person. That the amount of effluent that comes out of our mouths when we speak is enough to transmit this virus to other people. And so this is a sneaky virus that comes in under stealth and is spread easily to other people. Very different than HIV disease, which required fairly intense and very immediate interaction. Here, you can put your hands on an infected surface and then stick your finger into the mucous membrane of your eye or your ear, and that will transmit the virus. Nothing like that was happening with HIV.
Okay, and do you think the city has so far been doing enough to educate people, and especially the people who are most vulnerable, who have the least ability maybe to maintain hygiene and distance?
First, I think that what's really important in Virginia is that we are all focused on working together. This is not a time of retrospecting the DC government and whether it's done. I think they've done a very good job, but nobody can feel good. No one can take any victory laps when in just the last week alone in Washington, DC, there have been 1,066 more cases this Wednesday than there were last Wednesday, when there are now 71 more deaths in a week. And this is continuing to go up and up and up. Nobody is feeling that they've done a good job. What I think, though, that your question really makes us talk about and focus in on is the government can do only so much. But the government voices are not going to carry the day in many parts of our community over a long period of time. It's going to take the voices of the community itself. And that's why I'm sort of excited that we've got people like Antoine Big G Glover from the Go-Go star, and is an icon in this town and he's very popular, especially with his constituency. We now will have him appearing on buses. The Transportation Authority has now allowed us to get a picture of him with wearing a mask, and he's wearing a mask pointing out to everybody else, I'm wearing one, you too. We're really seeing labor leaders stepping up to the plate and talking to their peers and colleagues. We're seeing it in the faith community. So my point to you would be that, is the city doing enough to educate? They're doing, I think, everything they can, but there is more to be done. And so we at the Black Coalition Against COVID are putting up PSAs all over now in the on WHUR, on I'm sure they'll be on We Act and on PFW, and we have other radio stations that will be putting these messages on. And these are messages now not coming from a Surgeon General or some official. They're coming from the guy, the man or woman that drives the bus, who's saying, look, I may be essential, but I'm not disposable. You have to wear your mask if you're going to get on this bus. We need you because I got to go home to my family, and I need them. I need to be healthy enough to not bring something back to them. So we're having real people put the message out in ways that we can, and if we can coordinate, Virginia, real people in faith community, real people in the labor community, real people, in the go-go. And we just had a poetry slam that REACT was so involved with, just terrific. To hear our youngest of children in elementary school writing poems about protecting themselves from COVID. That's the voice that will get heard more than a federal or a local government official.
And one of the things that you just said raised a number of issues. This whole idea, the bus driver saying, I'm essential but not expendable. And the idea that when I leave the house and if I decide to get on the bus, I have to wear a mask and I have to stay away from the bus driver. I think we're getting mixed messages. People think that they're protecting themselves with the mask when really what we're doing, it's kind of an etiquette, like you would cough into your arm rather than cough into somebody's face. And I think our messages have gotten confused there. And I want to ask your opinion in general, but I also want to ask very specifically about something that keeps coming to our attention, which is that MPD officers have been told that masks are optional, except if they're going into a home where they know there's COVID. And we see all over town, MPD officers are within a very close distance or even touching people without covering themselves. So, I think we are getting mixed messages, and I wonder how we cope with that.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about that. And I have to be, as always, we have to be respectful of other people in the sense that maybe there is something about the mask obscuring the vision of the police officer and putting them and their lives at risk and not being able to react. And I don't know that to be the case, but that's the only excuse I can possibly imagine, because you're absolutely right. If the people who are supposed to be the upholders of social order are themselves not using the advice that everybody has been given, that's just terrible. And it adds to the mixed messaging. Not only does it add to mixed messaging, it accelerates the mismessaging because these, in fact, are supposed to be the people who are demonstrating appropriate behavior. Can you imagine if a police officer was speeding down the road, not on an emergency, and avoiding stop signs? It's the same thing. So I'm disappointed to hear that. But I think the critical thing that we do have to realize is that your mask protects me from you. My mask protects me, from you. That it goes both ways. I need the mask to protect me from you, but also my mask protects me from you. It's reciprocal and it goes both ways, and we should recognize that. But I think more than anything else, what we are going to have to somehow forge, and what this crisis has to forge, is a sense of a shared interconnectivity and a shared destiny. I don't get to live my life in a COVID environment as only my life. What I do affects you. It also affects the people with whom I live. What is so tragic is to see now how many people are becoming infected who stayed at home but were infected because of other people coming into the house and infecting them. And many times, and most of the times, these are family members who are doing this. And so this is just insane. We have got to now realize that we live in a mutually interdependent world, and that our behavior has to be based on some fundamental ethics of human compassion, human responsibility, and a relationship to others. That's fundamental ethics 101. And for someone to be so self-absorbed, so narcissistic, so self-indulgent, that they think the whole world revolves around them and I can do what I want and the heck with you. And I'm willing to get you ill because of my narcissistic behavior. That is an absolute sin. And I hope that those people will face it one morning, look in the mirror and look at themselves. And by the way, if that wasn't bad enough, what a person is doing when they are also going out without doing proper protection is that they are saying, when I do get ill, I am expecting health professionals to risk their lives and the lives of their family to take care of me when I get into a problem. So I'm willing to do whatever I do, and I'll play Russian roulette with my life, knowing, confident that some other human being will then have to play Russian roulette with their lives to save me. Can you imagine the ego of a person like that?
Unfortunately, yes. I do want to circle back for just a sec to the MPD issue, because I actually did inquire of the police department, and perhaps the message I got was wrong, but their public affairs specialist did not once, because I thought maybe they're afraid that it's impeding them to do something. That's not what they said. In fact, their message was all about that it's optional for the officers to protect themselves. And not once in their message to me did it say anything about protecting community members. So I perhaps they were just confused. I don't know. And I think that is a message we need to clear up, because they are out in the community. People have it's already hard enough to maintain your distance, but if an officer is on you, that's already a problematic interaction.
Well, we've got to look into this, and I'm going to look into it, because the other issue, of course, is as you are outlining this, it doesn't take much to extrapolate that of the people that are moving about our community with the greatest fluidity, it's the policemen. They're going everywhere. So if they are exposing themselves to the virus, then they are bringing that exposure with them all of the places that they go. And so if you can think about, I can't think of a more armed transmission instrument than the police department. And so that's just terrible. I think they have to reconsider this.
Yeah. The other, I hope so, and a number of us have been raising it. The other issue, which I actually have, I'm not sure that there's any way to correct it, is postal carriers. Who, people will say, well, my carrier wasn't wearing a mask and gloves. But of course, if they're wearing gloves, they're carrying the contamination from house to house anyway. And I worry more. I mean, I do worry that they might bring me something, but I take my mail and I dispose of the outside and I wash my hands. I do what I can, but they're in contact with so many people, and, and their pets and their property, and they have so little control. I worry about them. So are there other, as a public health commissioner, if you were in charge, what would you tell them to do, or tell us to do?
Well, I would begin as a health commissioner with the fundamental reason that I was the health commissioner, which is to protect human life. And so you have to care and love those postal workers, and you have to want them to be well and healthy. And so we have to work with them. If they are voluntarily choosing not to use a mask, when almost all other essential workers are demanding that masks be given to them and that other people in their environment wear them, this is an unusual set of outliers here. Maybe they are thinking that because they're outdoors and they are, in the open air where airflow problems are not an issue, they're not in a confined office, but that still doesn't take away from, if they're speaking to us and talking with us, and if we're talking to them, and you would think that they would be more prudent, just not only for their own welfare, but those of their families. So I think we have to first care. And we have to talk with them and understand. So I am in a position, thank goodness, with the Black Coalition Against COVID, to be able to talk with our labor leaders and ask them about this. And I will put this on our agenda to talk with them about. I think that what we certainly do understand is that this climate of confrontation in our society doesn't help us. This finger pointing and yelling, and we're seeing too many people in the streets hollering at each other. We see people now in supermarkets screaming at each other about whether they're wearing masks or not. We're going to have a way of having a civil conversation also that doesn't push people back into corners. We have to try to understand the other person. So I'm going to start my investigation, as it were, of this point that you raised, with trying to understand, and then very quickly pivot from understanding to, okay, now how do we solve the problem? But at the end of the day, we need people to be following the guidance. As I just gave you the statistics, this is not a made up world. This results are striking just like that.
And they're also spreading in different neighborhoods. That they've started showing data per neighborhood, which is striking and terrifying. On the postal issue, since you said you're going to look into it, what I've heard from some people is that the work is physically demanding, and that depending on what kind of mask you have, that can be, you can just get out of breath, or you can get tired of wearing it. It could be too hot. It could get wet. I've heard from both sides a little bit that there are all kinds of issues, and I do think that, as you said, we need more understanding on all sides. And, maybe they do think that because they're outside, it doesn't matter, but it is we have a very complex set of factors that we're trying to deal with.
Yeah.
And I do think that we're all very close to the breaking point a lot of the time, just because we've been inside too long. We've been with, we're worried about our finances. We're worried about our health. I'm seeing people are really starting to fray. So, I don't know that that's anything the Black Coalition Against COVID can do. Although I did think, like, the poetry event with the young kids, and we've got one coming up on Friday with the high school kids, and adults will have their chance too. Those are opportunities. It was great to hear, a fifth grader say, I won't say it was great. It was powerful to hear a fifth grader say, I'm wondering if I'll be another one who's 6 feet under. And to hear them talk about the ambulances out in the street, and then also to talk about just being bored and missing their friends. I loved hearing each person express, what was going on with them. I look forward.
See, what I think you're saying is, and it's so important, is coming back to this theme that we're all in this together, coming down to this theme that we need to find ways of supporting each other, being sympathetic and compassionate and loving and kind to each other, so that we can get through this. And I think that, so acknowledging that our kids are afraid, acknowledging that we are frustrated of being inside. There's nothing wrong with being frustrated about being inside. That's natural and it's normal. You want to go outside. So if you're going to be able to go outside or return to work, the legitimate anxiety that people have about paying their mortgage and making the light bill, those are real adult issues. So if you want to get to there, then do what's necessary to be able to get back to normal, which is wear your mask every time, social distance, wash your hands, and this issue of contact tracing, which I just want to make sure we touch base on. I am very concerned that given the natural distrust that people of color have towards government entities and health professionals about invading into our private lives, and Lord knows if I heard 1,000 times during the HIV epidemic about Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks and those kinds of things, and that those issues, those long-standing insults, stay with us, and it causes us in many ways to hurt ourselves again, because we get hurt by the initial episode, and then we hurt ourselves because of our response to that initial episode. And so, I used to wonder and ask, why do you keep bringing up Tuskegee? What does that got to do with wearing a condom tonight? When we were talking about HIV disease. In this case, contact tracing is so important. If we are not open and honest with the wonderful, heroic, and sheroic people who are going to be reaching out to us and to determine whether a known positive case, a new known positive case, whether or not the people that were associated with that person are themselves now at significant enough risk that they need to isolate. If that is found out, then we can catch cases, stop the cluster from spreading, and we'll be okay. But if we turn around and say, well, I'm going to lie about who I was with last week, or who I was around, or I don't want to tell, or I don't want to cooperate, then I guarantee you, when we start going back out, this virus will rebound on top of us with a vengeance. And because we're not massively socially isolating anymore, this will cause devastation to our community. So I am pleading with every ear that I can reach, please cooperate with the contact tracing team from the Department of Health. This is not the time to be worrying about past insults. This is about saving current and present lives.
What would you say, though, to people who really are afraid of the surveillance aspect, that information about them will be stored by people they don't trust and they don't know what's going to happen to it?
Well, first, I'd say the information is anonymous. And even then, I understand that may take somebody a leap of faith. But you have a choice. You can either decide to have that fear. What do you fear more? That fear, which can be controlled, by the way, and can be supervised and can be surveyed in terms of the use of data. That is a controllable fear, versus the fear of the number of people who have a virus that is killing us at increasing rates. I mean, it's kind of absurd. You have a known, that's like saying I've got somebody with a gun to my head, and I'm going to be more worried about a theoretical concern about how the data is reported about my murder. I mean, it doesn't make any sense when you compare one to the other. We have got to decide to take control over our own lives. Calvin Rolark, the great Calvin Rolark, community leader in DC for years.
I'm sorry, but we are running out of time.
Okay.
Maybe we can put Calvin Rolark's remark on the website or something. I'm so sorry, but we're coming up on the hour.
I'm glad to have the time with you, and thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. This is Community Under COVID, communityundercovid.com, We Act Radio. We've been talking to Dr. Reed Tuckson of the Black Coalition Against COVID. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great.
I'm gonna end this, so.